Well, today is June 30th, the end of Pride Month. And for many of us, we've been praying through this month that the Lord would guide the hearts and minds of our young people, and also as people who work with kids, guide our conversations to glorify Him in this cultural moment. But the reality is, for many of us, as we turn around almost every corner, there seems to be another presentation that tries to get this idea of gender dysphoria a seat in mainstream society. It can be an incredibly daunting and exhausting and dark place to be as people who care for kids. Well, today in the Celebrate Kids podcast, in our daily segment, Facing the Dark, we're going to be looking at this issue through the lens of some arenas where gender dysphoria is really being pushed to be normalized. And yet at the same time, Dr. Kathy is going to give us some insight on how we can step forward with confidence in our families, but also society, and how we can have hope that there is light shining in the darkest places of those who are battling gender dysphoria to see that maybe it isn't so normal at all. So let's turn now to Dr. Kathy Cook.
Don't be afraid of the dark. Be careful with stars. Not every light is gonna guide you, baby. Not every light is gonna guide you.
So Dr. Kathy, a Walgreens in Dallas, Texas is under fire for quietly housing a transgender clinic where customers can receive consultation for hormones, things like testosterone, to aid in so-called gender transition treatments. Now, reportedly, customers can go from the clinic into the pharmacy to get their prescriptions filled. Now, Walgreens has kind of been known as a progressive corporation recently in terms of how they're handling some of these different things. They recently scored a 100% score from the Human Rights Campaign for its approach to abortifacient prescriptions. And now the company's reportedly kind of stepping into arenas that can and probably will affect children. So I'd like to have you kind of talk through this a little bit with me, because I think it's natural for us to think that it's kind of an individual's right to receive these different treatments, and it's a corporation's right to kind of operate in these different ways. However, we know of hospitals that have asked parents to leave so that doctors can consult children without the influence of parents. And I don't want to raise any unnecessary alarm bells here, but what do you think of this kind of finding that we're having with this Dallas-based Walgreens?
I'm going to boldly say I don't mind that we're raising the alarm bells. I really don't. Somebody's got to do it. This is an important thing that parents and grandparents and even young people understand, that maybe it's no longer a safe place. And for people who don't know it, the Human Rights Campaign, Wayne, that's a brilliant name, right? That's a brilliant label for a campaign. Human rights. We're all about human rights. It's one of the most liberal organizations on the face of God's green earth. And a lot of people don't know that. So when people sign on to that or say supported by the Human Rights Campaign, some of us in the know realize that that is not going to be a conservative, evangelical, Christian, pro-family, pro-parenting organization. So I am very concerned about this. We do need to realize it was so far one Walgreens in one city. So I'm not saying that it's nationwide. However, they're being allowed to do it there. Is it possible it's happening elsewhere? Do parents and others want to consider where they're going to spend their money? I think it's an appropriate question to ask.
Yeah, Dr. Kathy, I think that these are important things to think about too, because part of the reality for many of us is that these things kind of happen. And sometimes, as we're seeing here, it's kind of just reported behind closed doors, that these different opportunities come up for kids to kind of hear about these things, or adults maybe to receive these kind of treatment ideas. So maybe you could help us, parents especially, and other people that work with kids, think through these so-called gender transition treatments and how they kind of challenge a person's identity. And maybe even how like making these treatments normal can kind of upset a child's natural pathway to progress in their identity formation. What should we know about this and the normalization of so-called gender transition treatments inside of society and how it impacts kids?
Great questions, Wayne. And by the way, I love the little adjective phrase, so-called transition treatments. I mean, like, that's really good, because let's be honest, right? We don't believe in the transition. A man cannot become a woman. It doesn't matter what you wear. It doesn't matter the length of your hair. It doesn't matter if you pop a pill. I'm sorry. The DNA is clear. It's just not going to happen. And so what I see happening in this, the challenging of identity who am I? So they reject who they were created to be by God, who is a loving, knowledgeable, intentional creator. And then they're kind of in that half space. Like, are they a woman? Are they a man? Are they a boy? Are they a girl? And that's not healthy. Identity is, who am I? How do you answer that? If they're stuck answering it in the past tense, well, I was a girl. They're stuck answering it for the future. I am becoming a boy. Well, who are you now? Identity controls behavior. If I don't know who I am, I don't know who to be. And I go where the wind blows me. And that's what I think is happening in a lot of our schools, a lot of our culture. They're listening to unfortunately, what I would say, with the wrong lyrics and potentially some unhealthy input. And the other thing I would say is that identity does naturally progress. It is a forever thing, right? Like, at my age, I'm still discovering things about myself. And I don't want to interrupt that with, some false agenda and some false goal that's going to go against, again, who God of the Bible created me to be. So I think those are my first thoughts about this.
Dr. Kathy, I think that's really helpful for us to process and think through. And maybe you could help those of us that are working with kids think through maybe even kind of a conversation. I'm a big person that likes to prepare for different things that kind of come up in life. And I like to prepare for these things maybe in my car. I think that people that drive by me think I'm really weird because I'm talking to nobody in my car, but I'm working through different conversations or talking points that I want to have with a conversation on something, right? I think maybe we all do that, or maybe I'm just really weird, but maybe just kind of humor me here. What topics or points should I be practicing in my car to help my kids think through these so-called gender transition treatments as they become more mainstream and normalized? How can I prepare for the conversations that I should be having with my kids? What are the points and the things that I need to highlight in those conversations?
Well, the first thing I want to say is we answer questions honestly with an age appropriateness to that. So, when a 3-year-old says, "Mommy, where do babies come from?" or a 7-year-old says, "Dad, hey, where do babies come from?" you don't give them an OBGYN lesson. You try to figure out why they're curious today and what answer would satisfy them today. And then later, you'll give them additional information. So I think that's important to consider. If an older child asks a question with a younger kid in the car, I think you delay answering it until you're with the older kid, later on in the day, perhaps. So honesty is important. Age appropriateness is important. And I think affirming your kid's gender, helping them become secure in their gender from the time that they're born, is super important. So how often do we say, "Man, I'm so glad God made me the dad of a boy. I'm so glad that you're a little boy. I love the way that you climb and kick and wrestle and read and write and think with science." And you say to your girls, "I love the way that you run and hike and climb and play boldly outside." So we make sure that we don't do some stupid gender stereotyping here that makes them nervous down the road. But let's affirm them for who they are. Let's make a big deal out of the positiveness of our gender. Our men fully men in front of their boys and girls, and our women fully women. Like, are we proud of who we are, and are we good, healthy examples of that? I think those kinds of things are important. The other thing I want to say, and not everyone may agree with me here, but you asked a very good question, and you ended it with, as these so-called transition treatments become more mainstream and normalized, let's all recognize that it's beginning to die out a bit. Like, I am really encouraged by the number of detransitioners who are coming out, men and women, young people who thought that they were in the wrong gender and started to transition and are now boldly, bravely, courageously coming out and saying, "Whoa, I made some terrible mistakes. This isn't working for me." I'm believing, I don't think I'm naive here. I'm believing that it's not going to be as mainstream. And the media wants us to think it is. That's their control over us. Every parent is scared because, well, that's not true, but a lot of parents are concerned because the media is all about how often it's happening. But again, statistically, is it really? Those are things that we should also consider in our conversations.
I really appreciate, as I do most days, on how Dr. Kathy closes us out here. It's reminiscent to me of something that Jesus said to the disciples in John chapter 16, as he in many ways forecasts the victory for those who find themselves following his teaching and trusting in the words of God. And this is what Jesus says in John chapter 16, beginning at verse 25. "I have said these things to you in figures of speech, because the hour is coming when I will no longer speak to you in figures of speech, but will tell you plainly about the Father. In that day you will ask in my name, and I do not say to you that I will ask the Father on your behalf. For For the Father himself loves you, because you have loved me and have believed that I came from God. I came from the Father and have come into the world, and now I am leaving the world and going to the Father." His disciples said, "Ah, now you are speaking plainly and not using figures of speech. Now we know that you know all things and do not need anyone to question you. This is why we believe that you came from God." And Jesus answered them, "Do you now believe? Behold, the hour is coming, indeed it has come, when you will be scattered, each to his own home, and will leave me alone. Yet I am not alone, for the Father is with me. I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world." I think Jesus' call for the disciples is one that also kind of transcends to us. It's a call to believe in the truth of who Jesus said he is, and also to take God at his word that he will not leave us, and that even though we experience challenging times, we can have peace and confidence that God's grand story is being carried out, and he's inviting us to live a bright light in these dark moments. And I hope that that's an encouragement for you. And I want to thank you for joining us this week on the Celebrate Kids podcast in our daily segment, Facing the Dark. I want to encourage you tomorrow to tune in to the podcast as well, as we release a new podcast offering from Dr. Kathy Cook called Dr. Kathy Says. It's going to be an encouraging time for those of us who are caring for kids and want to celebrate kids in this cultural moment. So on behalf of all of us here at the Celebrate Kids team, my name's Wayne Stender, and I want to say thanks for listening, and I'm looking forward to joining you here again tomorrow and again on Monday.